Hello ladies and gentlemen. Today I want to quickly talk about what I think it is all the elation or just characters in general for the first half of version 4 are gonna do, right? Now, a lot of this is a big topic, especially I'd say like Nihilux, Yai, Blade, whether or not Sparksy will age well. All of these are pretty common topics you'll find if you're paying attention to the current beta. However, I just want to give my own thoughts, my own speculation, so I can see whether it ages well or terribly once we actually get all the way there. I will be covering from Sparksy all the way to 4.4 with Heo SP, right? So, let's get straight into it. To start us off with Sparksy, I think she'll temporarily be a main DPS, right? Like she'll temporarily have that as her best team. However, when Yai rolls around, I do think Sparksy will be a sub DPS in that team. Now, this was already my original prediction. However, I had a bunch of people on my channel basically try to convince me that there's no way this would be possible, and I was starting to maybe lean off of it a little bit. However, with the most recent V3, I am even more confident than I was originally that she is meant to be a sub DPS, because they further buffed her sub DPS capability. On top of this, I believe they buffed the amount of thrill she gets in a trio elation team, and then on top of this, she also gets more buffing through her light cone. She gives more buffing through her E1, and these are things commonly found among sub DPSs, right? If we were to talk about a sub DPS with crit damage buffing in their base kit, an E1 that buffs the team's damage, a light cone that buffs the team's damage, and then the rest of their investment is just towards their own damage, this is actually a 1-to-1 comparison to Everknight's kit, right? It's built the exact same way, which leads me to highly believe that Sparksy will not be mainly targeted as a main DPS, or maybe she will. However, she'll also have this sub DPS role she can play in a mono elation team that will likely be her strongest team in the future, right? If I had to guess, Yai is probably going to have a unique gimmick like every single anniversary character in this game does, so she'll probably want something elation related that Sparksy can give her. Next, we go to Yao Guang. Yao Guang is a bit of a hated topic as of late because a lot of people are comparing her to Sunday, thinking that she might be complete bait and she won't age well. I think the opposite. Sunday, for one, wasn't part of the new path, and for two, was in the version before the new path was introduced. So, with this said, Yao Guang is not only the same path, and as well already completely synergistic with an elation character, but like they further buffed her elation buffing capabilities in the most recent V3, although it did slightly hurt her general value, which sucks. However, that goes to say, she is very clearly being made as like this dedicated third slot support that people can use on the elation teams. She isn't supposed to be incredibly niche, like let's say Everknight, right? She's only a sub DPS really for one team, being Cassie. I don't think this is that case. I think Yao Guang, you can actually draw comparisons to a Cyrene situation, but for her path. She'll likely be that best in slot third slot for all of them. However, some of them may prefer other sub DPSs or other sustains, stuff like that, right? So I think Yao Guang is here to stay because of her incredibly strong elation synergy. Having an aha instant whenever she ults, it would be hard to replace her so quickly, right? After this, we got La Mancha. Now, Mancha, I think, is going to be the first break DPS of this version, and yes, first. That means I do think there will be another one, which I'll get into later. But this obviously means he'll end up getting shafted in terms of the shilling for the more popular break DPS. This is very comparable to a Boot Hill situation, and I do think that this will be the reality, unfortunately. Maybe, that's why he looks so much like Boot Hill. It's because he was inevitably going to face this fate, right? I think La Mancha is probably the worst pull out of all of these characters that I'm going to be mentioning here. Next, we move on to Blade. I think it is incredibly likely that Blade will be an Elation Sustain. The reason I believe this is, one, it's lore accurate. The guy who's immortal, who's been cursed with immortality and trying to die for the longest, Aha would find it funny if he kept trying to kill himself as a sustain and take the damage for his teammates, but he couldn't, right? So for this reason, I think it's lore accurate for him to be an Elation Sustain, but also Sparksy needs an Elation Sustain for her main DPS team right now, because her trace for Elation caps out at 3 Elation characters, not mono Elation, because obviously they want you to also be able to use a Elation Sustain, Yao Guang, Sparksy, and then Sparkle, because she is an Elation related. So with this being the case, there needs to be an Elation Sustain, probably 1 or 2 patches after Sparksy releases. I think this would easily go towards Blade, and I prefer this over him getting shafted like My Day or him in 1.x, or for example La Mancha. This is way better because it likely means he's going to be in the best in slot mono Elation team with Yai, or at least he's going to have very good value with Sparksy, which I'd personally take nonetheless, right? After this, we move on to Yai. Now, I believe I already mentioned this earlier in the video. She is going to have a unique scaling gimmick. This seems to be something that's normal for every single main push Annie unit. They have a unique gimmick that isn't part of like the normal shit of HP scaling, or even if it is, it's like another side of it, right? For example, the way Cassie gets her ult. I think Yai will end up wanting punchline stacking or Aha instant turns. However, in my opinion, I lean more towards punchline stacking because this would vastly increase the value of Sparksy, because yes, even though she absolutely eats through skill points, they can simply do a Cassie situation where the DPS doesn't care about skill points, and so you use Sparksy consuming skill points to generate a absurd amount of punchline for, you know, Yai to scale off of. And then when the actual Aha instant goes, Yai scales her damage off of the punchlines and then completely nukes the enemy. I think this is the most likely case scenario for the way Yai scales and wants mono Elation, and that's why you'll have Sparksy, Yao Guang, and then Blade sustain in there, right? Now let's move on to Sylvie. I think I'm pretty 50-50 on this one, and it's the only one I'm really 50-50 on, right? I think there's a 50% chance they could deceive my expectations and become very greedy and just make Silverwolf SP best in slot with Yai because they're on the same patch. And then I think there's another 50% chance that I lean towards a little more that Silverwolf will be a Sparksy situation. And by this I mean she will have her own main DPS team. She will also prefer the Elation Sustain and likely Yao Guang, but similar to Sparksy, she'd be able to elevate an older character on that second slot for the team. Whether that be an older support, whether that be maybe the Herta, like a lot of people have been hoping for her to get buffed, I don't know, but I think it is incredibly likely, and I lean more towards this one than the latter, that she will end up being a Sparksy situation DPS team-wise, right? Next, we move on to Nihilux. This is the character that probably caught the most people off guard when she got dripped. People did not expect a character like this to be released. A lot of people are speculating, just off of the name, obviously, that she'd be a dot sustain, right? Because you had the Kafka buffs, then you had Heisland's release, now you have Black Swan buffs. The only thing that's really left is an Elation sustain. However, I don't think this is going to be the case, or even if it is, I don't think this sustain would be targeted towards dot. Dot is already in a very good spot and has some of the strongest early investment out of almost any teams in the entirety of the game. So it's already got a ton going for it. I think it is much more likely that Nihilux is straight up a buff to Acheron, right? That is my personal guess. Because Acheron, she did get Cypher, and it 100% did help her ability to clear endgame. However, Cypher, by the time Nihilux likely comes out, they're probably going to be like 1 year apart. Acheron getting no buffs since Cypher, I mean, that's just gotta hurt. Meanwhile, you got Firefly with Dahlia just massively elevating the break team. I think they haven't forgotten about Acheron mains, and they will make it so that Nihilux is mainly a buff towards Acheron's team to make her better going into the future and being able to last the rest of the version. I don't think they'd only buff Firefly, right? After this, last but not least, we got Himiko SP. Now, you guys will remember, I said I think La Mancha will be the introductory break DPS of this version, but not the last one, and he'll end up in a very bad spot because he won't get the spotlight of shilling. That is Himiko. I am putting big bans on Himiko SP being the break DPS and the second main push of this version. The reason I believe this is because, well, original Himiko is fire. And who does Dahlia specifically want as a break DPS? A fire break DPS. And I'm pretty confident La Mancha is unlikely to be fire. So even if he's a break character, he can't fully synergize with Dahlia. So Himiko already has the history of being used in break teams. She has the history of being a DPS. She has the history of being a fire character. However, alongside all of this, if you actually look at Himiko and the way she's supposed to be played in Currency Wars, her team and like the way she's played is the break team, right? So even in Currency Wars, Hoyo incentivizes using her in the break team, which I think is even further foreshadowing for the absolute perfect synergy that she's going to have with Dahlia. And this is where La Mancha is going to lose the spotlight as the break DPS of the version. Himiko SP will be the second main push, break related, best in slot team with Dahlia, and she'll probably get a best in slot that replaces the break sustain because, let's be honest, Slingshot is outdated, and I wouldn't be surprised if they also released another best in slot to power creep Fugue. That one is a little more up in the air in my opinion because Fugue does have some solid vertical investment and she's been a staple for the break team for quite some time, so it's hard to imagine her being, taken away, right? However, I could see it being a very simple, way where the sustain, similar to Hyacine and a Caster's team, also does significant amounts of damage. And so a Fugue who only specifically buffs one target on the team would not be as valuable as, let's say, a Fugue who gave team-wide buffs, gave everybody increased weakness break efficiency increase, gave everybody super break multipliers, right? That's what I think they're going to do to replace Fugue and make the entire break team for Himiko SP. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. What do you think of my thoughts? What are your thoughts on what these characters may do going into the future? Hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great night, and peace out.